I'm Tammy Showell, 34, and for years I believed I was the family disappointment. While my parents charged me $800 monthly rent to live in their basement, they handed my younger sister Emma a fully paid 3-bedroom house as a graduation gift. The favoritism stung, but I swallowed my pride and kept paying, thinking maybe I deserve less. That changed the day my father called me, financially irresponsible in front of the entire family. Something inside me snapped. I walked to my car, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app. What I showed them next would shatter their perception of me forever. They thought they knew their struggling daughter. They had no idea I'd been quietly building an empire while living in their basement. And the truth about my net worth would leave them speechless. If you've ever felt underestimated by those who should believe in you most, this story is for you. I still remember the day Emma got her house. May 15th, 3 years ago, a date burned into my memory like a brand. The whole family gathered for what Mom called a celebration brunch, though I hadn't been told what we were celebrating. Emma sat at the head of the dining table, practically glowing with anticipation. Dad cleared his throat and pulled out an envelope thick, official-looking, with the county recorder's seal visible through the window. "Emma, your mother and I are so proud of your dedication," he began, his voice warm with the kind of affection I'd spent years craving. "Graduating with your marketing degree, landing that entry-level position at the design firm, you've shown such responsibility." I watched from my usual spot at the table's corner, the same seat I'd occupied during childhood dinners, family meetings, and every gathering since. Emma's eyes danced with excitement as Dad continued his speech about her bright future and promising career. "We want to give you the foundation you deserve," Mom added, reaching across to squeeze Emma's hand. "A place to build your life, free from the burden of rent or mortgage payments." The deed slid across the table. 3-bedroom colonial, 2,200 square feet, updated kitchen, finished basement, 2-car garage. Market value, $340,000. Gift value, priceless. Apparently, Emma's squeal of delight pierced the air. She jumped up, nearly knocking over her orange juice, and threw her arms around both parents simultaneously. "Oh my God, thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't believe this is really mine." "Every penny paid for," Dad said, beaming with pride. "No mortgage, no debt, no strings attached. Just our investment in your future." I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my sister receive what amounted to a down payment on financial freedom. The same parents who charged me $800 monthly rent since I moved back home 5 years ago had just handed Emma a house worth more than I'd ever seen in my savings account. At least, that's what they thought. "Tammy, isn't this wonderful?" Mom's voice broke through my stunned silence. "Your sister will finally have the stability she needs." I forced a smile that felt like shattered glass. "It's amazing. Really amazing." Emma was already on her phone, probably calling friends or posting on social media. "I need to plan a housewarming party. This is going to be incredible." The rest of the brunch passed in a blur of congratulations, excited chatter about furniture, shopping, and detailed discussions of Emma's decorating plans. I pushed eggs around my plate, contributing the occasional nod or polite comment when directly addressed. Later, as we all toured Emma's new home, I watched her claim each room with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether she deserved good things. The master bedroom with its walk-in closet, the kitchen with granite countertops, the basement she planned to convert into a home office, all of it hers, free and clear. "Can you believe this is really happening?" Emma whispered to me as we stood, in what would become her living room. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up." I could only nod, my throat tight with emotions I couldn't quite name. That night, I drove back to my parents' house, descended the familiar steps to the basement, and sat on the edge of my narrow bed. The ceiling above me creaked as Emma's celebration continued upstairs, her laughter filtering down through the floorboards. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, scrolling through numbers that would have shocked my family into silence. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was living in a basement while secretly owning more property than Emma had just received. But seeing her joy, her unquestioned acceptance of their generosity, made me realize something I'd been trying to ignore. This wasn't about money. It was about love, respect, and the assumption that one daughter deserved to soar while the other was expected to merely survive. The basement had been my home for 5 years, though home felt like too generous a word for the converted space beneath my childhood house. When I first moved back after college, Mom had called it temporary, just until I got on my feet, found a good job, saved enough for my own place. 5 years later, I was still writing out that monthly rent check, still climbing down those 13 steps every night, still listening to my parents' footsteps above my head as they moved through their evening routines. The space itself wasn't terrible. I suppose Dad had finished it years ago when Emma and I were kids, installing drop ceiling tiles and cheap carpeting over the concrete floor. There was a small bathroom tucked into one corner, a kitchenette along the back wall, and just enough room for a bed, dresser, and desk. 2 narrow windows near the ceiling let in minimal natural light, and I'd learned to supplement with multiple lamps to combat the perpetual dimness, but it was the monthly ritual that really drove home my status in the family hierarchy. Every first of the month, I'd write out a check for $800, more than many people paid for actual apartments in our area, but as Mom frequently reminded me, you're not just renting space, Tammy, you're contributing to the household. The contribution apparently included my share of utilities, groceries, and general household expenses. Never mind that I ate most of my meals at work or ordered takeout to avoid the awkward family dinners upstairs. Never mind that I did my own laundry, cleaned my own space, and rarely used the common areas. The checks went into a wooden box on the kitchen counter, next to where Mom kept her grocery coupons and to-do lists. I'd seen Emma glance at it occasionally, but she'd never asked about the rent arrangement. Why would she? In her world, parents helped their children, not the other way around. I tried to make the space feel more like home, but there were limits to what I could do. The walls were concrete blocks painted white, which gave everything a slightly institutional feel. I'd hung some artwork and added colorful throw pillows, but the low ceiling and limited natural light made it impossible to escape the feeling of being underground. The worst part wasn't the physical space. It was the constant reminder of my place in the family pecking order. When relatives visited, I'd hear them upstairs asking about me, and Mom's response was always the same. Oh, Tammy's downstairs. She's still figuring things out. At 30-4. Meanwhile, Emma lived in her beautiful colonial, posting Instagram photos of her sunset views and dinner parties. She'd invite me over occasionally, always with a slightly patronizing tone. You should come see what I've done with the guest room. Maybe it'll give you some decorating ideas for when you get your own place. The irony was suffocating. Every night, I'd sit at my small desk, managing my property portfolio on my laptop, calculating rental income, researching new investment opportunities. I'd review maintenance requests from my tenants, approve repairs, and analyze market trends. Then I'd close the laptop, look around my basement room, and wonder how long I could maintain this charade. The rent checks were particularly bitter. $800 a month to live in a basement, while Emma lived mortgage-free in a house worth 40 times that amount. I could have bought a dozen properties with the money I'd paid my parents over the years, but I kept writing those checks, kept playing the role of the struggling daughter who needed their help. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night, listening to the house settle around me and wonder what would happen if I just stopped paying. If I packed my things and moved into one of my rental properties, left them to wonder where their reliable monthly income had gone. But something always held me back, maybe. Loyalty, maybe fear. Maybe just the crushing weight of family expectations. The basement had become more than just my living space. It was a symbol of everything I'd accepted about my place in the family. A concrete reminder that I was the daughter who paid rent, while Emma was the daughter who received gifts. It was a daily lesson in knowing my worth, according to the people who were supposed to love me most. But secrets have a way of growing in dark places, and mine was getting too big for the basement to contain. The medical bills started arriving in March of the previous year, stacking up on the kitchen counter like accusations. Dad's heart attack had been sudden and severe, requiring emergency surgery and weeks of recovery. The insurance covered most of it, but most still left a crushing remainder that my parents couldn't manage on their fixed income. I found Mom crying over the kitchen table one evening, bills spread around her like fallen leaves. The largest $112,000 for the cardiac catheterization had final notice, stamped across it in red ink. "We'll figure it out," she said when she saw me standing in the doorway. "Maybe we can set up a payment plan, or I'll take care of it," I said quietly. She looked up, mascara smudged under her eyes. "Tammy, honey, you don't have that kind of money. You're already stretched thin paying rent, and I'll handle it, Mom. All of it." The next day, I paid off every medical bill in full. $12,000 for the catheterization, $8,000 for the hospital stay, $4,000 for the cardiac surgeon's fees, $1,500 for the ambulance ride. The total came to just under $40,000, which I transferred from my investment account without blinking, but I didn't tell them how I'd done it. I couldn't bear to see their shock, their questions, their inevitable demand for explanations. Instead, I let them believe I maxed out credit cards, borrowed from friends, maybe even taken a loan against my future. Mom hugged me with tears in her eyes, calling me such a good daughter, while Dad patted my shoulder and promised they'd pay me back someday. They never asked for receipts. They never questioned how their financially struggling daughter had managed to come up with $40,000 in cash. They simply accepted it, grateful for the relief, but somehow not curious enough to dig deeper. The pattern had started long before Dad's heart attack. When their furnace died 3 winters ago, I quietly paid the $4,000 replacement cost. When Mom's car needed a new transmission, I'd covered the $2,500 repair. When their property taxes went up unexpectedly, I made up the difference without being asked. Each time, I presented it as a hardship money I'd scraped together, sacrifices I'd made, help I'd received from mysterious sources. They'd accepted my explanations with the same unquestioning gratitude they showed for everything I did for them. It was easier than the truth, and it let them maintain their narrative about my place in the family. Meanwhile, Emma contributed nothing to these emergencies. She'd call to check on Dad after his surgery, send flowers to the hospital, and post concerned messages on social media. But when it came to actual financial help, she was conveniently absent. Her new house came with new expenses, she'd explain. The property taxes alone were substantial, and she was still figuring out her budget. I never called her out on it. Never suggested that someone who'd received a free $300,000 house might be able to help with Dad's medical bills. I just quietly transferred the money, paid the bills, and let my parents continue believing that Emma was too young and overwhelmed to help, while I was the reliable one who'd always figure something out. The thank you notes were always the same. "We don't know how you did it, but we're so grateful. You're such a blessing to this family. We're so lucky to have a daughter who never gives up." But gratitude came with conditions. I was appreciated for my reliability, my willingness to sacrifice, my ability to solve problems without creating inconvenience. I was the daughter who handled emergencies, who absorbed financial stress, who asked for nothing in return except the continued opportunity to prove my worth through service. Emma was the daughter who deserved gifts, opportunities, and unconditional support. I was the daughter who gave them. The receipts told a different story, though. $40,000 for medical bills, $4,000 for the furnace, $2,500 for the car, $800 a month in rent for 5 years, $48,000. Groceries, utilities, household repairs, emergency expenses. The total was well over $100,000 that I contributed to the family over the years. I kept all the records in a folder on my desk, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe someday I need proof of what I'd sacrificed. Maybe someday I'd want to show them the math, the cold calculations of exactly how much their struggling daughter had contributed to their comfort and security. But for now, the folder sat beside my laptop, a quiet monument to everything I'd given and everything I'd never received in return. Every month, I'd add the new rent receipt to the stack. Another $800 in service of maintaining their illusion about my limitations. The truth was becoming harder to carry, though each sacrifice felt heavier, each grateful hug more hollow. I was building wealth they couldn't imagine while living in their basement, solving their problems while being treated like the family charity case, something had to give. The question was whether I'd be the one to break the silence, or if it would break me first. The group chat messages started innocent enough. Emma had created a family thread called Showell Squad about 6 months after getting her house, ostensibly to share updates and coordinate family gatherings. But it quickly became a showcase for her lifestyle and a platform for casual cruelty disguised as concern. Just booked a weekend in Napa. Sometimes you have to treat yourself, right? She'd posted, along with photos of a resort that probably cost more than most people's monthly. Salary.mom had responded with heart emojis and, "You deserve it, sweetheart." Dad had added, "Our successful girl. Enjoy every minute." I'd sent a thumbs up emoji and said nothing else. The pattern continued week after week. Photos of expensive dinners, designer handbags, weekend getaways to places I'd only seen in travel, magazines. Each post was accompanied by commentary about living your best life, investing in experiences, as if these weren't luxuries, but necessary components of personal growth. But it was the subtle digs that really stung. Emma had perfected the art of concern trolling, framing her condescension as sisterly worry. "Tammy, you should really think about getting out more. I know money's tight, but there are lots of free things to do. Maybe some hiking or library events. Has anyone heard from Tammy lately? I worry she's becoming too isolated down there. It's not healthy to spend so much time alone. Mom, maybe we should help Tammy make a budget? I learned so much about financial planning in college. It's really not that hard once you understand the basics." The worst part was how my parents responded to these messages. Instead of defending me or recognizing the patronizing tone, they'd pile on with their own expressions of concern. "That's so thoughtful of you to worry about your sister, Emma. Tammy knows she can always come to us for advice. Maybe Emma could help Tammy with some interview tips. You're so good at presenting yourself professionally, honey." I'd screenshot some of the more egregious messages, not sure what I planned to do with them, but needing some record of the casual disrespect. Reading them later in the privacy of my basement room, I'd marvel at how effortlessly Emma managed to position herself as the successful, generous sister concerned about her struggling sibling. The truth was more complicated, though. Emma's entry-level marketing job paid about $35,000 a year, decent for someone fresh out of college, but hardly the foundation for her lifestyle. Without the free house, without parents covering her health insurance and car payments, without the safety net of unconditional family support, she'd be living paycheck to paycheck like most people her age, but she never had to consider that. Reality. In Emma's world, good things happened because she deserved them, and struggle happened to people who weren't trying hard enough. She'd internalized our parents' narrative about her own success so completely that she genuinely believed her circumstances were the result of her superior choices and work ethic. "I think the difference between us," she'd said to me once, during a rare moment of attempted sisterly bonding, "is that I've always been really focused on my goals. Like, I knew exactly what I wanted and I went after it. Maybe you just need to be more intentional about your future." I nodded politely, biting back the urge to ask what goals she'd actually achieved beyond graduating college and landing an entry-level job. But challenging Emma's self-perception would have been pointless. She needed to believe in her own exceptional qualities, needed to feel that her advantages were earned rather than gifted. The group chat became a daily reminder of this dynamic. Emma's updates about her life were celebration-worthy accomplishments. My rare contributions were met with polite concern or gentle suggestions for improvement. When I mentioned getting a promotion at work, the response was tepid congratulations, followed immediately by advice about building on this momentum and not getting complacent. But when Emma had posted about getting a 5% raise, the family chat had exploded with praise. "So proud of our career woman. Your hard work is paying off. This is just the beginning." I started leaving the notifications on silent, checking the messages less frequently, contributing even less to the conversations. But the damage was cumulative. Each exchange reinforced the same message. Emma was the daughter who succeeded, and I was the daughter who needed help. The screenshots folder on my phone grew thicker. a digital collection of small humiliations and casual dismissals. I told myself I was documenting the pattern for my own clarity, but really I was building evidence for a case I wasn't ready to make, because the truth about our respective circumstances would shatter more than just Emma's self-image. It would force my parents to confront their assumptions, their favoritism, their willingness to believe that one daughter deserved everything, while the other deserved lectures about budgeting and intentionality. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, but every condescending message, every casual dismissal of my worth, every celebration of Emma's minor accomplishments while my major sacrifices went unnoticed, it all pushed me closer to the moment when silence would become impossible. The family. Group chat had become a window into how they really saw me. And what I saw there was a woman they'd systematically underestimated, dismissed, and taken for granted. That woman was getting tired of playing small. The idea came to me on a Tuesday morning in 2019, sitting in my car outside a coffee shop where I'd just been rejected for yet another apartment. The landlord had taken one look at my income decent but not spectacular and my current address, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Basement dweller, family dependent, risk. "I'm sorry," he'd said, not sounding sorry at all. "We've decided to go with another applicant." I knew what that meant. Someone with parents who could co-sign, or better credit, or simply a more impressive current living situation. I drove home feeling defeated. Another rental rejection, adding to the growing pile of evidence that I was stuck in my parents' basement indefinitely. But as I sat in their driveway, staring up at the house where Emma and I had grown up, a different thought occurred to me. What if instead of trying to rent someone else's property, I bought my own? The idea seemed absurd at first. I was paying $800 a month in rent to my parents, working 2 jobs just to save a few $100 after expenses. How could I possibly afford a down payment on a house? But that night, I did the math. $800 a month was nearly $10,000 a year in rent payments alone. Over 5 years, I'd paid my parents almost $50,000 for the privilege of living in their basement. Add in my contributions to household expenses, emergency payments, and all the other financial help I quietly provided, and the number was staggering. I started researching. Real estate investment, down payment requirements, FHA loans, rental, property financing. The internet became my classroom, YouTube videos, my professors. I learned about cash flow, cap rates, appreciation, tax advantages. I discovered that real estate could be not just a place to live, but a vehicle for building wealth. The learning curve was steep. I'd never thought of myself as business-minded, had always assumed that investing was for people with money I didn't have. But the more I read, the more I realized that real estate investment wasn't about having massive capital. It was about understanding leverage, market dynamics, and the patience to build wealth over time. My first target was a small duplex, about 20 minutes from my parents' house. It was in a working-class neighborhood, nothing fancy, but the numbers worked. The rent from both units would cover the mortgage, taxes, and insurance, with a small positive cash flow left over. More importantly, someone else would be paying down my mortgage while the property appreciated over time. The asking price was $68,000. With an FHA loan, I need about $5,000 down, plus closing costs and a small emergency fund. I had $12,000 saved from years of careful budgeting and my second job as a freelance bookkeeper money my parents assumed was my entire financial cushion. The hardest part was getting the loan without my parents finding out. I had to be creative about where I received mail, where loan officers could reach me, how I scheduled property inspections. I told my parents I was working extra freelance hours, which explained the odd phone calls and occasional evening absences. When the closing day arrived, I sat in the title company office feeling surreal. The papers spread across the conference table made it official. I was a property owner. At 28 years old, while living in my parents' basement and paying them rent, I'd secretly become a real estate investor. The duplex wasn't glamorous. It needed new paint, some minor repairs, and a thorough cleaning, but it was mine. More than that, it was my first step toward financial independence. Even if no one in my family knew it existed, I spent weekends renovating, learning basic carpentry and plumbing through necessity and YouTube tutorials. I interviewed potential tenants, created lease agreements, set up a separate business account for rental income. Within 2 months, both units were occupied, generating enough revenue to cover all expenses plus a small profit. The psychological shift was profound. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. Every month, when I wrote that $800 rent check to my parents, I knew I was also collecting over $1,000 in rental income from my own property. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it felt like a secret superpower. I started researching. My next purchase before the first property was even fully stabilized. The plan became clear. Reinvest every dollar of profit, leverage equity from one property to acquire the next. Build a portfolio systematically and quietly. My parents noticed that I seemed happier, more confident, but they attributed it to, finally, accepting your situation or learning to appreciate what you have. They had no idea that their basement-dwelling daughter was becoming a business owner, that their financially irresponsible child was making investment decisions that would change her life. The secrecy was exhausting but necessary. I couldn't imagine trying to explain my strategy to parents who saw me as someone who needed their help, who charged me rent while giving my sister a free house. They wouldn't understand the vision, wouldn't believe I was capable of executing. So I kept quiet, kept paying rent, kept playing the role of the struggling daughter while secretly building an empire they couldn't imagine. That first duplex was more than a property investment. It was my declaration of independence, even if no one else knew I declared it. The foundation was laid. Now I just had to build on it, one property at a time, one secret at a time, until the truth became too big to hide. The second property came 6 months later, a small single-family home that needed work but had solid bones and sat in an appreciating neighborhood. By then, I developed a system for managing my secret life as a real estate investor while maintaining the facade of struggling to get by. My property management software became my most valuable tool. Accessible only from my laptop in the privacy of my basement room. Every evening after my parents went to bed, I'd open it up and review the dashboard that showed my growing empire. Rent collections, maintenance requests, market valuations, cash flow projections, all hidden behind a password-protected interface. That might as well have been invisible to my family. The learning never stopped. I devoured podcasts about real estate during my commute, listened to audiobooks about property investment while doing household chores, spent lunch breaks reading market analyses and rental comparisons. My coworkers probably thought I was the most boring person alive, always declining happy hour invitations and working through lunch. But I was building something they couldn't see. Each property acquisition followed the same careful pattern. I'd identify potential targets through online listings and driving neighborhoods, always in areas where I wouldn't accidentally run into family or friends. I'd schedule viewings during work hours or weekends when I could claim to be running errands. I'd handle all communications through a separate phone number and email address, creating a parallel identity as T. Showell Property Investments. The financing became easier as my portfolio grew. Banks started seeing me as a serious investor rather than a hopeful first-time buyer. My debt-to-income ratio remained strong because the rental income from existing properties supported new acquisitions. What looked like increasing debt was actually strategic leverage, each mortgage backed by appreciating assets and reliable cash flow. By the end of my second year, I owned 4 properties. The original duplex, the single-family fixer-upper, a small apartment building with 6 units, and a townhouse in an emerging neighborhood. The monthly rental income exceeded my day job salary, but I kept working, kept living in the basement, kept writing those rent checks to my parents. The reinvestment strategy was ruthless. Every dollar of profit went toward down payments on new properties, building repairs, or reserve funds for emergencies. I lived off my day job income while my real estate business grew itself, compounding monthly like interest on the world's best-kept secret. The hardest part wasn't the financial management, or even the secrecy, it was the isolation. Success feels hollow when you can't share it with anyone. I'd close a deal on a new property and have no one to celebrate with. I'd receive a rent check that covered my entire monthly expenses and have to pretend I was still worried about money. My social life became non-existent, not because I couldn't afford it, but because maintaining the charade required constant vigilance. I couldn't risk slipping up, mentioning a tenant's call or a property inspection in casual conversation. I couldn't explain sudden cash purchases or why. I always seemed to have money for family emergencies, despite supposedly living paycheck to. Paycheck. The property management software tracked everything with ruthless precision. Maintenance costs averaged about 12% of gross rental income. Vacancy rates stayed under 5% because I'd learned to screen tenants carefully and maintain properties proactively. The total portfolio value grew by an average of 7% annually. While mortgage balances decreased through tenant payments, but the numbers on the screen represented more than financial success. They were evidence of capability in my family had never recognized in me. Each property proved I could analyze markets, negotiate deals, manage contractors, handle difficult situations, and build something substantial from nothing. Emma's group chat messages became even more grating during this period. Her excitement about a 5% raise seemed absurd when I was generating more passive income in a month than she earned in 3. Her financial advice felt like a toddler explaining mathematics to an engineer. Her concerns about my lack of ambition would have been laughable if they weren't so insulting. The irony deepened with each passing month. My parents would lecture me about responsibility and planning for the future while I was building wealth faster than they ever had. They'd worry about my retirement savings while I was creating multiple income streams that would last for decades. They'd suggest I consider more stable career paths while I was mastering one of the most proven wealth-building strategies in history. Sometimes, late at night, I'd pull up the portfolio summary and stare at the total asset value. The number kept growing, month by month, year by year, compounding into something that would have shocked my family into silence. I was building generational wealth while they debated whether I was responsible enough to manage my own checking account. The system was working perfectly, but it was also becoming unsustainable. The cognitive dissonance of living two completely different lives was exhausting. I was a successful real estate investor pretending to be a struggling adult child. I was financially independent while paying rent to live in my parents' basement. I was building an empire while being treated like someone who needed basic life advice. The truth was getting too big for the basement to contain. My success was too substantial to hide indefinitely. And my tolerance for being underestimated was approaching its breaking point, but I wasn't ready to reveal everything yet. The business was still growing, the profits still compounding, the opportunities still multiplying. I needed a few more properties, a little more security, before I could afford to shatter their assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The silence was becoming a burden, but it was also my protection. Once they knew the truth, everything would change. The question was whether I'd be ready for that change when the moment finally came. Maintaining the illusion of financial struggle required careful choreography. I developed an elaborate performance that convinced my family I was barely scraping by, even as my real estate portfolio generated more monthly income than most people's salaries. The fake budget was my masterpiece of deception. Handwritten on yellow legal pad paper, it showed every dollar of my day job income allocated to essential expenses with painful precision. Rent to parents, $800. Car payment, $280. Insurance, $150. Groceries, $200. Gas, $120. Phone, $75. The remaining $50 was labeled emergency fund, a laughably small amount that reinforced their perception of my financial incompetence. I'd leave this budget lying around occasionally, making sure my parents would see it when they came down to the basement for storage items. Sometimes I'd even ask Mom for advice about where I might trim expenses, letting her suggest I switch to generic brands or cancel my streaming subscriptions. Maybe you could pack lunches instead of buying them, she'd suggest gently, not knowing that I owned a 6-unit apartment building that generated more profit in a month than her. Grocery budget for the year. The performance extended to every aspect of my visible life. I drove the same 10-year-old Honda I'd bought in college, deliberately avoiding repairs that weren't absolutely necessary. I shopped at discount stores when my parents might see me, bought generic everything, and constantly mentioned how expensive things were getting. Gas prices are killing me. I'd sigh while filling up my tank, neglecting to mention that my tenant's rent payments covered my transportation costs and everything else. I learned to deflect questions about my freelance bookkeeping income by claiming it was irregular and barely worth mentioning. In reality, that side business had grown into something substantial, partly because managing my own properties had taught me skills that other small business owners desperately needed. But the emotional toll of constant deception was heavier than I'd anticipated. Every conversation required mental editing. Every story needed careful construction to avoid revealing inconsistencies. I couldn't mention the contractor I'd hired to renovate a kitchen, so I had to pretend I'd spent the weekend watching Netflix. I couldn't explain why I knew so much about property law and tenant rights, so I had to play dumb when those topics came up. The hardest moments were when my parents would offer financial advice or express concern about my future. Dad would suggest I look into more stable career paths, maybe consider going back to school for a practical degree. Mom would worry about my retirement savings, encouraging me to start small with maybe $50 a month in an index fund. You're still young enough to turn things around, Dad would say with genuine concern. But you can't wait forever to get serious about your finances. I'd nod and thank them for their wisdom, all while calculating that my portfolio's appreciation from the previous month exceeded their annual retirement contributions. The fake struggling lifestyle also meant turning down opportunities that might raise suspicions. When Emma invited me to expensive restaurants, I'd decline and suggest cheaper alternatives. When friends planned vacation trips, I'd claim budget constraints. When my parents offered to help me buy better clothes for job interviews, I'd accept gracefully, even though I could have afforded a completely new wardrobe without thinking twice. Even maintained a separate checking account with just enough money to support the struggling daughter narrative. This account received my paychecks and paid my visible expenses: rent, car payment, groceries I bought when my parents might check receipts. It was always running low, always requiring careful management, always reinforcing the illusion that I was living paycheck to paycheck. My real financial life happened through business accounts my family didn't know existed. Property management fees, maintenance expenses, mortgage payments, insurance premiums, all handled through Tammy Showell. Property investments, and completely invisible to anyone who might ask questions about my spending. The deception required constant vigilance. I couldn't use a credit card that might generate statements with property-related expenses. I couldn't take phone calls from tenants or contractors when family was around. I couldn't celebrate when a property appreciated significantly or when I closed on a new acquisition. Sometimes I'd catch myself in moments of genuine pride about what I was building, only to remember that I had to hide it all behind a mask of financial incompetence. The success felt hollow when it had to be secret, but the secret felt necessary to protect something I wasn't ready to lose. The most painful part was how completely my family believed the performance. They accepted my fake struggles with the same certainty they'd accepted Emma's obvious advantages. They never questioned why someone supposedly so bad with money could always help during emergencies. They never wondered how I managed to maintain my car, pay my bills on time, and still contribute to family expenses while earning so little. They saw what they expected to see: the daughter who needed help, guidance, and occasional financial rescue. They couldn't imagine that their basement-dwelling rent payer was actually building wealth faster than they'd ever dreamed possible. But the facade was becoming exhausting to maintain. Each conversation required more careful editing. Each family gathering demanded better acting skills. I was running out of energy for the performance, even as my real estate business continued to grow beyond my original expectations. The truth was becoming too big to hide, but revealing it would mean shattering their entire understanding of who I was. And I wasn't sure any of us were ready for that conversation yet. The wedding planning started 18 months before the actual date, but the financial demands began almost immediately. Emma had been dating Marcus for 3 years, and their engagement party alone cost more than most people's entire wedding budget. The celebration was held at an upscale country club, with past hors d'oeuvres, an open bar, and professional photography to document every moment of her happiness. I contributed $200 to the party fund, which Mom had described as so generous, especially given your situation. The irony stung. My monthly rental income from just one property exceeded the entire cost of Emma's engagement party. But I was praised for scraping together what appeared to be a meaningful sacrifice. But the engagement party was just the beginning. Emma had Pinterest boards full of wedding inspiration, all of it expensive, and most of it completely unrealistic for someone earning $35,000 a year. The venue she wanted cost $12,000 for just the reception space. The photographer she'd fallen in love with charged $8,000 for the day. The dress she tried on and couldn't stop talking about was $4,000. I know it sounds like a lot, she'd said during one of our family dinners, but this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. I want it to be perfect. Mom and Dad nodded, approvingly, already reaching for their wallets. They'd started a wedding fund the week after the engagement, determined to give their youngest daughter the fairy tale she deserved. But even their generous contributions weren't enough to cover Emma's expanding vision. That's when the pressure on me began. It would mean so much to Emma if you could help with the wedding, Mom said one evening, cornering me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. I know money's tight for you, but maybe you could contribute to one of the smaller expenses, the flowers maybe, or the favors. The flowers alone cost $3,000. The favors custom candles with Emma and Marcus's names were another. $800. These weren't small expenses. They were major budget items that my parents somehow expected me to absorb while barely making ends meet. I'll see what I can do, I'd said, which had become my standard response to financial requests I couldn't afford to fulfill without raising suspicions. But Emma's expectations went beyond money. She wanted me to be her maid of honor, which came with its own financial obligations. The bridesmaid dress she'd chosen cost $350, and it had to be ordered from a specific boutique in a specific color that would photograph perfectly with her overall aesthetic dot. Then came the bachelorette. Party demands. Emma had researched a weekend in Charleston, complete with a historic district hotel. Spa treatments and dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of but could tell from her descriptions were expensive. The estimated cost per person was $800, not including the bride's share that the bridesmaids were expected to cover. I've been dreaming about this since I was little, Emma said when I hesitated about the Charleston trip. All my friends are doing destination bachelorettes. I can't be the only one who settles for something local and boring. The wedding shower was another major expense. Emma wanted it hosted at the same country club where they'd held the engagement party with professional catering and elaborate decorations. The estimated cost was $4,000, split among the female relatives and wedding party members. I did the math. Between the bridesmaid dress, bachelorette party, wedding shower contribution, and the various wedding expenses my parents expected me to help with, I was looking at nearly $6,000 in total cost. For someone supposedly living paycheck to paycheck in her parents' basement, this represented an impossible financial burden. But the real insult came during a family planning meeting, when Emma casually mentioned that she'd been thinking about asking for additional help with the honeymoon. Marcus and I found this amazing resort in Costa Rica, she said, showing us photos on her phone. It's only $4,000 for the week, but with flights and everything, we'd need about $7,000 total. I was hoping maybe the family could help make it happen. $7,000 for a honeymoon on top of an $80,000 wedding that my parents were already stretching to afford. And somehow, I was expected to contribute to this financial fantasy while paying $800 monthly. Rent to live in their basement. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Emma lived mortgage-free in a house worth $340,000, but she couldn't afford her own honeymoon. She earned a decent salary with minimal expenses, but she needed family contributions to fund her wedding dreams. She'd received more financial support in 3 years than I'd accumulated in savings over my entire adult life, or so they thought. We just want Emma to have the wedding she's always dreamed of, Dad explained when I questioned whether some of the expenses might be excessive. She's worked so hard and she deserves to start her marriage with beautiful memories. Meanwhile, I was supposed to sacrifice even more of my supposedly limited resources to fund those beautiful memories. The daughter who paid rent was expected to subsidize the wedding of the daughter, who'd received a free house. I started calculating how to contribute without revealing my actual financial situation. I could afford every expense Emma had mentioned without affecting my real estate investments at all. The entire wedding budget represented less than 2 months of rental income from my portfolio, but paying it would require careful explanation about where the money came from. The wedding demands forced me to confront the unsustainability of my deception. I couldn't keep pretending to struggle financially while producing thousands of dollars for family events. At some point, my parents would start questioning how their basement-dwelling daughter kept finding money for emergencies and celebrations, but I also couldn't bear the thought of Emma's wedding being the moment I revealed my secret success. She deserved her special day without the drama of family revelations about favoritism and assumptions. So I prepared to write another check, knowing it would add to the growing pile of evidence that nothing about my financial situation made sense. The contradiction was becoming too obvious to ignore, and eventually, someone would start asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. The wedding planning had become more than just an expensive celebration. It was a test of how far I'd go to maintain peace, how much I'd sacrifice to protect their illusions, and how long I could keep paying for the privilege of being underestimated. By the time Emma's wedding planning reached its frenzied peak, I'd quietly acquired my 8th property, a small commercial building with 3 retail units and 2 apartments above. The purchase represented a significant milestone, not just financially but psychologically. I was no longer just a residential landlord. I was a diversified real estate investor with a portfolio spanning multiple property types and markets. The numbers on my year-end summary were staggering. Even to me, total portfolio value, $1.2 million. Monthly gross rental income, $8,400. Net monthly cash flow after all expenses, $3,200. My real estate investments were generating more passive income than most people earned from full-time jobs. And the equity growth from appreciation added another layer of wealth that compounded monthly. The commercial building had been a particularly satisfying acquisition. Located in a revitalizing downtown district, it attracted stable, long-term tenants who signed multi-year leases. The retail spaces housed a coffee shop, a boutique clothing store, and a small law office. The apartments above were occupied by young professionals who appreciated the urban location and were willing to pay premium rent for the convenience. Managing 8 properties required sophisticated systems that I developed over 3 years of trial and error. My property management software tracked everything: rent collection, maintenance requests, lease renewals, expense categories, tax deductions, and profit projections. I'd become proficient with spreadsheets that would have impressed most accountants, analyzing cash-on-cash returns, cap rates, and debt service coverage, ratios with the fluency of someone who'd been in real estate for decades. The irony of my situation had become almost absurd. I'd wake up in my basement room, check my phone for any overnight maintenance emergencies from tenants, review rent payments that had been automatically deposited into my business accounts, then climb the stairs to have breakfast with parents who worried about my financial future. Have you thought about increasing your 401k contribution? Dad had asked me the previous week. Even an extra $25 a month could make a difference over time. I nodded seriously, thanking him for the advice, while mentally calculating that my real estate portfolio had appreciated by more than his entire retirement account balance in the past month alone. The commercial property required more hands-on management than residential units, but it also provided valuable learning opportunities. I negotiated with business owners about lease terms, coordinated with commercial contractors for specialized repairs, and navigated local zoning regulations. Each challenge expanded my expertise and confidence as a real estate professional. But perhaps the most significant development was the realization that I'd outgrown the need for traditional employment. My rental income exceeded my day job salary by a substantial margin, and the gap was widening every month. I could quit my job, move out of my parents' basement, and live comfortably off my real estate investments while continuing to grow the portfolio. The question was whether I was ready for that level of exposure. Quitting my job would require explanations. Moving out would raise questions about sudden financial resources. The freedom I earned through years of strategic investing came with the cost of inevitable discovery. Meanwhile, Emma's wedding expenses continued mounting, and my contributions to various celebrations and family emergencies had reached levels that should have triggered serious questions about my supposed financial limitations. The cognitive dissonance was becoming impossible to ignore, even for parents who seemed determined to maintain their narrative. About my circumstances, the most recent property acquisition had stretched my borrowing capacity to its limits, but in a good way. I was leveraged optimally, with debt service covered by rental income and enough cash flow remaining to fund ongoing operations and future investments. The portfolio had reached critical mass large enough to support itself and generate meaningful wealth, but not so large that it required institutional management. I'd also begun exploring additional investment strategies. The success of the commercial building had opened my eyes to other opportunities, mixed-use developments, fix and flip projects, even the possibility of new construction. My accountant discovery that would have shocked my parents had suggested establishing a real estate investment company to optimize tax advantages and provide more flexibility for future growth. But all of these opportunities required a level of activity and communication that would be impossible to hide indefinitely. Conference calls with contractors, meetings with potential business partners, site visits to prospective properties, the administrative demands of serious real estate investing were incompatible with living in my parents' basement while pretending to struggle financially. The success had created its own problems. I'd achieved more than I'd originally dreamed possible, but the achievement felt incomplete as long as it remained secret. I was building generational wealth while being treated like someone who needed basic financial advice. I was mastering one of the most proven paths to financial independence while living in conditions that suggested the opposite. The monthly ritual of writing my parents' rent check had become almost comical. $800 that I earned from my real estate investments in less than 3 days, paid to the people who thought I was too financially irresponsible to own property. I was literally paying rent to live in a basement while owning more real estate than they could imagine. But the truth was getting harder to contain. The success was too substantial, the contradictions too obvious, the emotional cost of secrecy too high. My empire had grown beyond the basement's capacity to hide it, and I was running out of energy for the performance. Something had to give. The question was whether I'd choose the moment of revelation or whether circumstances would choose it for me. The dinner that changed everything started like dozens of others' extended family gathered around my parents' dining room table, sharing updates about careers, relationships, and future plans. Emma had insisted on hosting since her engagement, wanting to show off her new house and practice her entertaining skills for married life. But this particular Sunday, Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda were visiting from out of state, along with my cousins Sarah and Michael. Family gatherings always brought out the worst dynamics, with everyone performing their assigned roles for an audience. That hadn't seen the daily reality of our relationships. Emma had prepared an elaborate meal, complete with appetizers, wine, pairings, and dessert that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Her dining room table, set with wedding china she'd received as an early gift, gleamed under the chandelier she'd installed the previous month. "This house is absolutely gorgeous," Aunt Linda gushed, admiring the crown molding and hardwood floors. "You've done such a beautiful job decorating, Emma. It feels so grown-up and sophisticated." Emma beamed, accepting compliments about her natural eye for design and impressive homemaking skills. The conversation flowed easily through topics like her wedding planning, Marcus's promotion at work, and their plans for starting a family in their beautiful home. I sat at the far end of the table, contributing occasional comments and trying to enjoy the evening despite the familiar sting of being overlooked. The wine helped, and Emma had actually prepared delicious food, so I focused on being grateful for the family time rather than resentful about the dynamics. But then Uncle Robert, 3 glasses of wine into the evening, decided to offer some unsolicited career advice. "You know, Tammy," he said, pointing his fork in my direction, "Sarah's company is always looking for good administrative assistants. The pay might not be amazing, but it's steady work with benefits. Maybe it's time to consider something more stable than whatever freelance stuff you're doing." The table went quiet. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as everyone turned to look at me, waiting for my response to what was clearly meant as helpful guidance. "I'm actually doing okay with my current work," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice level. "But are you really building toward anything?" Uncle Robert pressed, warming to his theme. "I mean, you're what, 34? You can't live in your parents' basement forever, paying rent like a teenager. At some point, you need to get serious about your future." Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Robert, maybe we should—" "No, I think this needs to be said," Uncle Robert continued, emboldened by wine and his perception of his role as the successful uncle dispensing wisdom. "Tammy's a smart girl, but she's been spinning her wheels for years. Meanwhile, Emma's building a real-life career, house, marriage, the whole package." Emma looked mortified but said nothing. Mom fidgeted with her napkin. My cousins studied their plates with the intensity of people who wished they were anywhere else. But Uncle Robert wasn't finished. "The problem is that your generation thinks you can just drift through life, waiting for opportunities to fall into your lap. Emma understands that success requires planning and commitment. She's invested in her future. But Tammy," he gestured vaguely in my direction. "I'm sorry to be blunt, but what exactly are you building? What do you have to show for 10 years of adult life?" The words hit like physical blows. What did I have to show for 10 years of adult life? Only a real estate portfolio worth over $1 million, monthly passive income that exceeded his salary, and more financial security than anyone at this table could imagine. But he wasn't done. "The truth is, Tammy, you're financially irresponsible. You've been enabled too long, allowed to avoid real consequences for your choices. Maybe if your parents charged you market rate for rent, you'd be motivated to make better decisions." That's when Dad, trying to defend me, made it worse. "Robert, that's not fair. Tammy helps out plenty around here. She's been very responsible about paying rent and contributing to household expenses. Just last year, she helped us with those medical bills when I had my heart attack." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Uncle Robert said, his voice rising with righteous conviction. "She helped you with medical bills? What kind of backward situation is that? The parents helping the adult child should be the normal direction of support, not the other way around." He turned back to me, his expression a mixture of pity and frustration. "Tammy, I'm trying to help you here. You're a grown woman living in your parents' basement, paying them rent, occasionally scraping together money for family emergencies. That's not normal. That's not sustainable. That's not the life of someone who's got their act together financially." The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Every eye at the table was on me, waiting for my response to this brutal assessment of my life choices and character. Emma looked like she wanted to disappear. My parents seemed torn between defending me and agreeing with their brother-in-law's harsh evaluation. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was 3 years of accumulated frustration at playing this role. Maybe it was the casual cruelty of being lectured about financial responsibility by someone who had no idea what I'd accomplished. But suddenly I was done with the performance. Done with the assumptions. Done with being treated like a cautionary tale at family dinners. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and set it on the table where everyone could see the screen. "You want to know what I have to show for 10 years of adult life?" I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Take a look." The numbers on the screen told a story that would change everything. The silence that followed was deafening. 8 adults stared at my phone screen, trying to process numbers that didn't match their understanding of reality. The banking app showed my primary investment account balance, $847,392. But that was just the beginning. "I'm sorry," Uncle Robert said slowly, leaning forward to make sure he was reading correctly. Are those real numbers?" I swiped to the next screen, showing my property management account. Monthly rental income, $8,400. Year to date. Profit, $38,400. The real estate portfolio summary displayed 8 properties with a combined value of $1.20. Million.mom, single quotes, S wine glass slipped from her fingers, hitting the table with a sharp clink. Dad's mouth opened and closed like he was trying to speak, but couldn't find words. Emma looked pale, her eyes darting between my phone and my face as if trying to reconcile this information with everything she thought she knew about her struggling sister. "Tammy," Dad whispered, "what exactly am I looking at?" I took a deep breath, feeling 3 years of secrecy lifting off my shoulders like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. "You're looking at my real estate investment portfolio," I said, calmly. 8 properties, all generating positive cash flow. I started with a duplex 3 years ago and reinvested every dollar of profit into additional acquisitions. Uncle Robert was scrolling through the screens now, his expression shifting from confusion to astonishment. "These are actual properties? You own all of these?" "I own all of these," I confirmed. "The duplex on Maple Street, the single family on Oak Avenue, the 6-unit apartment building downtown, the commercial property on 3rd Street. "Wait," Emma interrupted, her voice sharp with disbelief. "The commercial building with the coffee shop? You own that?" "I bought it 6 months ago." "The coffee shop, the boutique, the law office, and the 2 apartments upstairs. All mine." The revelation hit the table like a bomb. Everyone started talking. At once, voices overlapping in a chaos of questions and exclamations. "How is this possible? Where did you get the money for down payments? Why didn't you tell us? How long has this been going on?" I held up my hand for quiet, feeling a strange sense of calm despite the magnitude of what I was revealing. "I started investing 3 years ago because I was tired of being rejected for apartment rentals. Instead of continuing to pay rent to landlords who didn't want me, I decided to become a landlord myself. I used the money I'd saved from my day job and freelance work for the first down payment, then reinvested all profits into additional properties." Dad was shaking his head slowly, like he was trying to wake up from a dream. "But Tammy, honey, we had no idea you were capable of something like this. The complexity, the business knowledge, the financial management. Where did you learn about real estate investing?" Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Books, podcasts, online courses, trial and error," I said. "I spent every free moment studying markets, analyzing deals, learning about property management. It became my obsession." Uncle Robert was still scrolling through my accounts, his earlier condescension replaced by something that looked like awe. "The cash flow alone is more than most people's salaries. And the appreciation, my God, Tammy, you're building serious wealth here." "I know," I said simply. Emma found her voice, though it came out strained. "But why didn't you move out? Why keep paying rent here if you can afford?" She gestured vaguely at my phone. "If you can afford anything?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications about family dynamics and assumptions that had shaped our relationships for years. Because moving out would have required explanations I wasn't ready to give, I said carefully. "Because I knew that once you found out about this, everything would change between us. Because it was easier to let you think I was struggling then, to deal with questions about why I was keeping it secret." "But the medical bills," Dad said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "When you helped with my heart attack expenses, $40,000, I said, which I paid in cash from my investment account. The same account you're looking at right now." The implications rippled across the table as everyone recalculated years of assumptions about family dynamics, financial responsibility, and who needed help from whom. "Tammy," Mom said, tears starting to form in her eyes, "we've been so worried about your future. We've been treating you like someone who couldn't manage money," I finished. "Like someone who needed advice about budgeting and career planning, like someone who was irresponsible and unfocused." Uncle Robert set my phone down carefully, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I owe you an apology. A huge apology. I had no idea." "No one did," I said. "That was the point." Emma was staring at her hands, processing the reversal of everything she believed about our relative success. All this time, I thought I was the one with the stable future. The house, the career, the wedding planning. "You are successful," I said gently. "Your achievements are real, but so are mine." The numbers on my phone screen had done more than reveal my financial situation. They'd shattered the family narrative that had positioned Emma as the responsible daughter and me as the one who needed guidance. In 30 seconds, Uncle Robert's lecture about financial irresponsibility had become absurd. My parents' concerns about my future had been revealed as misplaced, and Emma's position as the family success story had been complicated by the realization that her struggling sister had been quietly building an empire. The dinner table that had been set for celebration and family bonding had become the site of a reckoning that would reshape every relationship in the room. But the real revelations were just beginning. The aftermath of dinner was chaos. Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda left early, mumbling apologies and promises to talk soon. My cousins escaped as quickly as politeness allowed, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama they'd witnessed. Emma retreated to her kitchen, loudly cleaning dishes while everyone pretended not to hear her. Occasional sniffles that left me with my parents in the living room that had suddenly become a courtroom where I was simultaneously the defendant and the star witness. "I don't understand," Mom said for the 10th time, clutching a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. "How did we not know? How did we miss all the signs?" Dad was pacing, his mind working through implications that grew more unsettling the longer he considered them. "The business knowledge alone, Tammy, you've been managing 8 properties for years. That requires sophisticated financial skills, legal understanding, contractor relationships. Where did you think I went every weekend?" I asked quietly. All those errands I was supposedly running, all those freelance clients I was supposedly meeting with. I was handling property inspections, tenant issues, maintenance coordination. I was building a business. The reality of my deception was sinking in, and with it came their own complicity in maintaining the illusion. They had accepted my fake struggles because it fit their narrative, never questioning the inconsistencies that should have been obvious. "But the rent," Mom said, her voice small. "We've been charging you rent this whole time, and you could have bought a house, multiple houses." "I did buy multiple houses," I pointed out. 8 of them. Dad stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. "Why, Tammy? Why let us think you were struggling? Why let us worry about your future when you are more financially secure than we are?" It was the question I'd been dreading, because answering it honestly meant acknowledging truths about our family dynamics that would hurt everyone involved. "Because you needed me to be struggling," I said carefully. "Because Emma was the successful daughter, and that meant I had to be the one who needed help. Because your identities as parents were tied to having one child who made you proud, and one child who made you feel needed." The words hit harder than I'd intended. Mom's face crumpled, and Dad looked like I'd slapped him. "That's not," Dad started, then stopped. "We never meant to make you feel like you had to choose between success and family acceptance, didn't you?" I asked gently. "When Emma got a free house and I got charged rent, what message did that send? When she got celebrated for a 5% raise, while my contributions to family emergencies were taken for granted, what was I supposed to conclude?" Emma appeared in the doorway, having apparently finished her aggressive dishwashing. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "I never asked for different treatment," she said defensively. "I never knew you were that you had." "I know," I said. "This isn't your fault, Emma. You accepted the advantages you were given, just like I accepted the limitations I was assigned. But the system was broken from the beginning." My phone buzzed with a text message, then another. Word was already spreading among extended family members about the dinner revelation. Uncle Robert had apparently shared at least some details with other relatives, because the messages ranged from congratulations to confusion to requests for investment advice. "This is going to change everything," Dad said, still processing the full scope of the situation. "Everyone in the family, everyone at church, everyone who knows us, they all think exactly what you wanted them to think." I interrupted. "That Emma is the success story, and I'm the cautionary tale. That's been comfortable for everyone except me." Mom was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she confronted the reality of what my secrecy revealed about our family relationships. "We failed you," she whispered. "We failed you so completely that you felt you had to hide your success from us. What kind of parents does that make us? The question hung in the air, unanswerable and devastating. Emma sat down heavily in the chair. Across from me, her expression a mixture of hurt and bewilderment. All those times you declined invitations because money was tight. All those conversations about budgeting and career planning, you were lying to us. I was protecting myself, I said, and protecting all of you from having to confront uncomfortable truths about favoritism and assumptions. But the medical bills, Dad said again, returning to the detail that seemed to bother him most. You paid $40,000 of our expenses while we were charging you rent. How do we even begin to make sense of that? The same way you made sense of giving Emma a free house while charging me to live in your basement, I replied. You accepted what served your narrative and ignored what didn't. The living room fell silent except for the sound of Mom's quiet crying and the ticking of the mantel clock that had marked time through countless family discussions that had never been this honest. My phone buzzed again. Another relative wanting clarification about what they'd heard. The revelation was spreading through our extended family network like wildfire, and soon everyone would know that their assumptions about the Showell sisters had been completely wrong. What happens now? Emma asked, her voice small. It was a question none of us could answer. The truth was out, but its consequences were still unfolding. Relationships built on false assumptions would need to be rebuilt on honest foundations. Family dynamics that had seemed natural and inevitable would be revealed as choices that could be changed. Now, I said slowly, we figure out how to be a family that doesn't need someone to struggle in order for someone else to shine. But first, we had to deal with the immediate fallout of a secret that had grown too big to contain. 3 days after the dinner revelation, I sat at my parents' kitchen table with a printed document that would either repair our family relationships or destroy them entirely. I'd spent the previous nights crafting what amounted to a manifesto, a clear statement of what needed to change if we were going to move forward together. A written ultimatum? Dad asked, staring at the papers like they might bite him. Tammy, don't you think this is a bit dramatic? I think 3 years of living a lie was dramatic, I replied calmly. This is just clarity. Mom and Emma sat on either side of Dad, forming a united front that felt familiar but different now that the power dynamics had shifted. They knew I didn't need them anymore, not financially, not practically, not in any of the ways that had previously defined our relationships. Can you just tell us what it says? Emma asked, her voice careful and measured. I pulled out my own copy and began reading. Item 1. The monthly rent payments stop immediately. I will not continue paying $800 a month to live in a basement while being treated as the family charity case. Dad winced. Tammy, we never intended. Item 2, I continued. I will be moving out within 30 days. I've already identified a property I want to purchase for my personal residence. This got their attention. Mom's eyes widened with what looked like panic. You're buying another house? She asked. A townhouse in Riverside District, I confirmed. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, updated kitchen, attached garage. I close next week. The silence stretched as they processed this information. I was using their own gift-giving precedent against them. Emma had received a free house, so I was buying my own. Item 3. Family financial contributions will be reciprocal. If Emma receives gifts or financial support, I expect equivalent treatment. If I'm asked to contribute to family expenses, Emma will contribute equally. Emma shifted uncomfortably. I don't understand what that means practically. It means if you get help with wedding expenses, I get help with something equivalent. I explained. It means if I'm expected to contribute to Dad's medical bills, you're expected to contribute the same amount. It means the end of a system where one daughter pays and one daughter receives. That seems fair, Dad said slowly, though his expression suggested he was still working through the implications. Item 4. My business success will be acknowledged and respected. No more financial advice about budgeting or career planning. No more concerned questions about my future stability. No more treating me like someone who needs guidance about basic adult responsibilities. This was perhaps the most important point, and also the most difficult for them to accept. Their identities as helpful parents were threatened by my independence. We were trying to help, Mom said defensively. You were trying to maintain a dynamic that served everyone except me, I corrected. Your help was based on the assumption that I needed it, not on the reality of my situation. Item 5. Emma's achievements will be celebrated proportionally to mine. If her 5% raise deserves family-wide congratulations, my property acquisitions deserve equal recognition. If her engagement merits an expensive party, my business milestones merit equivalent celebration. Emma looked stricken. Are you saying I don't deserve to be celebrated? I'm saying we both deserve to be celebrated, I replied. But only one of us has been. Dad was reading over the document now, his businessman's engaging with the specific terms and conditions. I outlined. Item 6, he read aloud. Respect for privacy and autonomy. No more unsolicited life advice. No more family meetings about my choices. No more treating my decisions as topics for group discussion and intervention. This feels like you're trying to punish us, Mom said, tears beginning to form again. I'm trying to establish boundaries that protect everyone, I said. I'm trying to create a framework for relationships based on mutual respect rather than assumed helplessness. And if we don't agree to these terms, Dad asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then I'll move out, limit contact to holidays and obligatory family events, and build my life around people who see me as I actually am rather than who you need me to be. The threat hung in the air like smoke. They'd spent 3 days processing the revelation of my success, but this was the first time they'd been forced to confront what it might cost them. You're asking us to completely change how our family works, Emma said quietly. I'm asking you to stop a system that required me to hide my success in order to maintain your comfort, I replied. I'm asking you to love me for who I am instead of who you need me to be. Mom was crying openly now, confronted with the possibility of losing the daughter she'd never really known. We do love you, she said through her tears. We've always loved you. You loved the version of me that fit your narrative, I said gently. The struggling daughter who needed help, who made you feel useful, who provided contrast to Emma's achievements. I need you to love the version of me who doesn't need your help, who makes her own decisions, who might actually be more successful than anyone expected. Dad set the document down and looked at me directly for the first time since I'd started. Reading, these terms are not negotiable. They're not negotiable. I confirmed. The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of Mom's quiet crying and the refrigerator's occasional hum. Everything we'd been as a family hung in the balance, waiting for their decision about everything we might become. We need time to think about this, Dad said finally. You have until I move out, I replied. 30 days. I stood up, leaving copies of the document on the table and headed toward the basement stairs. At the doorway, I turned back to face them. For what it's worth, I hope you choose to accept these terms. I'd rather rebuild our relationship than replace it. But I won't continue living a lie to protect your illusions. The conversation was over, but the real negotiation was just beginning. Emma knocked on my basement door 2 weeks after the confrontation, but not to apologize or negotiate. She came with a business proposal that revealed just how much our family dynamics were about to change. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, settling into the chair across from my desk. About reciprocal treatment and equal contributions. I saved the spreadsheet. I'd been working on a cash flow analysis for a potential knife property and gave her my attention. I'm listening. The thing is, she continued, fidgeting with her engagement ring. Marcus and I had been looking at investment opportunities, real estate specifically, and we thought maybe he could help us get started. The irony was thick enough to cut. 3 weeks ago, Emma had been giving me financial advice through the family group chat. Now she was asking for investment guidance from the sister she'd spent years patronizing. What kind of help are you looking for? I asked carefully. Well, we were thinking about buying a rental property. Maybe something small to start with, like a duplex or a single-family home. But we don't really know how to evaluate deals or manage tenants or any of that stuff. She paused, clearly working up to something bigger. We were hoping you might be willing to partner with us. Like, we could provide some of the down payment, and you could provide the expertise and maybe co-sign for better loan terms. I leaned back in my chair, studying my sister's face. The desperation was subtle, but unmistakable. Emma had spent her entire adult life being the successful daughter, the one with the bright future and sound judgment. My revelation had shattered that narrative, and now she was scrambling to reestablish her position. How much were you thinking of investing? I asked. We have about $15,000 saved, she said, trying to sound confident. I know that's not a huge amount, but with your experience and credit, we thought it might be enough to get started. $15,000. Less than I'd spent on my last property's renovations. Less than the monthly rental income from my portfolio. But I kept my expression neutral. And what would you expect from this partnership? Equal ownership, she said quickly. 50-50 split of all profits and decisions. I mean, we'd be providing half the capital, so it seems fair. I almost laughed. Emma wanted to contribute. $15,000 to a partnership where I'd provide the expertise, creditworthiness, property management skills, contractor relationships, and probably most of the down payment, in exchange for equal control and profit sharing. That's an interesting proposal, I said diplomatically. But I'm not sure it makes financial sense for me. Emma's face fell slightly. What do you mean? I mean that my time and expertise have value. The lending capacity I've built through years of successful property management has value. The systems and relationships I've developed have value. Splitting profits 50-50 when I'm providing 90% of the resources doesn't seem like a fair partnership. She was quiet for a moment, processing the rejection of her assumption that I'd jump at the chance to help her enter my business. Maybe we could work out different terms, she suggested. Like, what if we start smaller? Maybe you could just give us some advice about finding properties or recommend a real estate agent. I could do that, I agreed. But Emma, can I ask you something? She nodded. Why now? 3 weeks ago, you were posting in the family chat about how I needed to be more intentional about my future. You were suggesting I learn budgeting skills from you. What changed? The question hit home. Emma's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her hands. I didn't know, she said quietly. I didn't know what you'd accomplished. You thought I was the failure and you were the success, I finished. And now that you know the real situation, you want access to my success. That's not fair, she protested, but without much conviction. Isn't it? I asked gently. For years, you've had advantages I didn't get. The free house, the family support, the assumption that your achievements deserve celebration while mine went unnoticed. Now you're asking me to give you advantages in my area of expertise too. Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at the engagement ring that represented everything she thought made her more successful than me. I feel like I don't know anything anymore, she admitted finally. I thought I was doing so well, building such a good life. And then you showed us those numbers, and suddenly I realized I'm not successful at all. I'm just lucky. The vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard. For the first time since the dinner revelation, Emma wasn't defending her position or making demands. She was acknowledging the uncomfortable truth about our relative circumstances. You are successful, I said sincerely. You have a good job, a beautiful home, a loving relationship. Those things matter. But success isn't a competition between us. But you're so much further ahead, she said, tears beginning to form. Your portfolio is worth more than I'll probably earn in my entire career. How do I even compete with that? You don't, I said simply. You build your own version of success instead of trying to replicate mine. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of shifted family dynamics settling between us. The partnership idea, Emma said eventually. You're right that it wasn't fair. I was asking you to carry me instead of asking you to teach me. Teaching you is something I'd be happy to do, I offered. But as your sister, not as your business partner. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared that now everyone will always compare us, and I'll always come up short. Then don't let them, I said. Build something that can't be compared. to real estate investments. Build something that's uniquely yours. Emma stood up, looking emotionally drained, but somehow lighter than when she'd arrived. I'm sorry, she said at the door. For the group chat messages, for the assumptions, for thinking I had the right to give you advice when you were all ready. So far ahead of me. We're sisters, I said. We'll figure it out. But as she climbed the stairs back to the main house, I wondered if that was true. The revelation of my success had changed everything, including Emma's understanding of her place in the family and the world. Whether we'd figure out how to be sisters in this new reality remained to be seen. Moving day arrived 3 weeks later, marking the end of 5 years in my parents' basement and the beginning of whatever our family would become next. The townhouse I purchased was everything the basement wasn't: bright, spacious, modern, and entirely mine. The irony wasn't lost on me as I directed the moving truck. I was relocating 6 blocks away from my childhood home, into a neighborhood where property values had been climbing steadily for years. My new neighbors included young professionals, small business owners, and established families people who'd assumed I couldn't afford to live among them when I'd been rejected for rentals in the same area 5 years earlier. My parents and Emma came to help with the move, though their assistance felt more like penance than genuine helpfulness. They'd spent the previous 3 weeks processing my ultimatum, having difficult conversations about family dynamics, and slowly accepting that their basement-dwelling daughter was now their most financially successful family member. The kitchen is gorgeous, Mom said, running her hands over the granite countertops that were nicer than anything in their own home. And these hardwood floors, they must have cost a fortune to refinish. Everything's been updated, I confirmed, opening cabinets to show the soft-close doors and custom organization systems. New appliances, renovated bathrooms, fresh paint throughout. Dad was examining the crown molding with the appreciation of someone who'd done home improvement projects himself. This is quality work. What did something like this cost, if you don't mind me asking? It was a question he never would have posed 3 weeks earlier when he'd assumed I couldn't afford basic necessities. Now he was genuinely curious about my purchasing power and investment strategy. $280,000, I said. But it appraised for $310, so I have immediate equity. Emma was quiet as we toured the rooms, taking in the master suite with its walk-in closet and spa-like bathroom, the second bedroom I'd set up as a home office, and the third bedroom that would serve as a guest room. It's beautiful, she said finally, though her voice carried notes of something complicated, maybe sadness, maybe envy, maybe just the disorientation of seeing her supposedly struggling sister living better than she was. The moving process itself was surprisingly emotional. Each box I carried out of the basement represented years of hidden success, secret dreams, and carefully managed deception. The property management files, the investment books, the folder of receipts documenting my contributions to family expenses, all of it coming into the light after years in the shadows. I can't believe you managed all of this from that little desk, Dad said, helping me load my office equipment into the truck. 8 properties, all those tenants, the financial tracking. How did you keep it all organized in such a small space? You learn to be efficient when you're working in secret, I replied, securing my laptop case that contained 3 years of carefully hidden business records. The symbolism of leaving the basement felt profound. I was physically moving up in the world, but more importantly, I was stepping out of a role that had constrained me for years. No more rent checks to parents who didn't understand my capabilities. No more pretending to struggle while building wealth. No more hiding my accomplishments to preserve family comfort. As we finished loading the truck, Mom pulled me aside near the front steps where I'd climbed countless times over the years. We've been talking, she said, her voice careful and measured. Your father and I about your terms, about the changes you want to see. I waited, not wanting to influence her decision, but knowing that this conversation would determine whether we had a future as a functional family. We accept them, she continued, all of them. The equal treatment, the recognition of your success, the end of unsolicited advice, everything. Relief flooded through me, though I tried not to show it. What changed your minds? Honestly, we realized we had no choice, she admitted. Not if we wanted to keep you in our lives. And more than that, we realized you were right. We had been treating you unfairly, making assumptions that served our comfort more than your dignity. Dad joined us, having overheard the conversation. The hardest part is accepting how wrong we were about your capabilities, he said. Not just recently, but for years. We saw what we expected to see instead of what was actually happening. We missed watching you become successful because we were too invested in believing you needed our help, Mom added. That's our loss, not yours. The apology was more than I'd expected and more meaningful than I'd imagined it would be. They were acknowledging not just their recent mistakes, but the systemic problems that had made my deception feel necessary. Later, that evening after the truck was unloaded and my parents had returned home, I stood in my new living room surrounded by boxes, but feeling more settled than I had in years. The space was mine in every sense, purchased with money I'd earned, decorated according to my preferences, free from the judgments and assumptions that had shadowed my life in the basement. Emma had stayed to help me unpack, working silently, to arrange books on shelves and organize kitchen supplies. We'd been dancing around the obvious conversation all day, but as the sun set through my new windows, she finally spoke. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, sitting on my new couch that was nicer than anything in her own living room. About building something that's uniquely mine instead of trying to compete with your success. What kinds of things interest you? I asked, genuinely curious about my sister's ambitions now that we could be honest with each other. I've always been good at event planning, she said thoughtfully. The engagement party, the wedding preparation, people keep asking me to help with their celebrations. Maybe I could turn that into something more than just a hobby. It was the first time I'd heard Emma talk about career aspirations that weren't tied to competing with me or proving her superiority. She was considering her actual strengths and interests rather than simply trying to maintain her position as the successful daughter. That sounds like something you'd be excellent at, I said sincerely. You have great aesthetic sense and you're naturally good with people. Would you, she started, then stopped. I was going to ask if you'd help me think through the business. Sighed, but I don't want to fall back into expecting you to solve my problems. I'd be happy to share what I've learned about running a business, I offered. But as your sister who wants to see you succeed, not as someone you're competing with. We spent the next hour talking about event planning as a potential business, market analysis, startup costs, and client development strategies. For the first time in years, we were having a conversation as equals to adults sharing ideas and expertise rather than one successful sister advising one struggling sister. As Emma prepared to leave, she paused at my front door and looked back at the townhouse that represented everything our family dynamics had hidden. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. I should have said that 3 weeks ago, but I was too shocked and maybe too jealous to think clearly. But I'm proud of what you built, and I'm sorry it took so long for anyone to recognize it. After she left, I walked through my new home one more time, taking in the space that marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The basement had been my hiding place, but this townhouse was my declaration. I was no longer the struggling daughter who needed help. I was the successful daughter who deserved recognition. The foundation had shifted beneath our family, but maybe that meant we could build something stronger on more honest ground. 6 months after moving into my townhouse, our family gathered around my dining room table for the first time since the revelation dinner at Emma's house. But this meeting was different. We'd come together to formalize the new terms of our relationships, to put in writing the changes that would guide how we treated each other going forward. The document I prepared was less an ultimatum than a family constitution, establishing principles for mutual respect and equal treatment that we'd all had. Time to consider and adjust. This feels very official, Dad said, examining the printed pages, like we're negotiating a business contract. Maybe that's what healthy family relationships need, I replied. Clear expectations instead of assumed dynamics. Mom was reading through the revised terms, noting the modifications we'd discussed over several conversations during the previous months. Section 1. Financial contributions and gifts will be proportional and reciprocal. She read aloud. Family members will contribute to shared expenses based on their ability to pay, and gifts or financial support will be distributed equitably among siblings. This was the most significant change from my original demands. Instead of insisting on exactly equal treatment, we'd agreed on proportional fairness that recognized our different financial situations while ending the systematic favoritism that had characterized our relationships. Section 2. Career and life achievements will be celebrated equally, regardless of the family member's perceived need for encouragement or support. Emma nodded at this provision. I think this one's been the hardest for me to adjust to, she admitted. I got used to being celebrated for small things because I was supposedly the successful one. Learning to share that spotlight has been challenging. But good for you, Dad pointed out. You've accomplished more in the past 6 months with your event planning business than you did in 3 years at your corporate job. It was true. Emma's decision to start her own event planning company had energized her in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. She'd booked 12 events in her first 6 months, built a social media presence that attracted clients from across the region, and discovered talents she'd never developed in her previous role. Section 3. Privacy and autonomy will be respected. Family members will not offer unsolicited advice about career, financial, or personal decisions unless specifically asked for input. This provision had been particularly difficult for my parents to implement. They'd spent years treating me as someone who needed guidance, and breaking that habit required constant conscious effort. I still catch myself starting to say things, Mom confessed. Just yesterday, I almost suggested you might want to consider diversifying your investments. Then remembered that you probably understand financial strategy better than anyone in this family. It's a process, I said gently. We're all learning new ways to relate to each other. Section 4. Business and professional expertise will be acknowledged and utilized appropriately. Family members with specialized knowledge will be consulted and compensated fairly when their services are requested. This section had emerged from Emma's initial request for real estate investment help, instead of expecting free advice or unfair partnerships. We'd established a framework for sharing expertise that respected everyone's time and knowledge. I still can't believe I'm paying my sister for business consulting, Emma said with a laugh. But it's actually made me take the advice more seriously, and it's made the advice better because you're approaching it professionally instead of just trying to help family. Section 5. Past grievances and resentments will be acknowledged but not used as weapons in current conflicts. We commit to moving forward based on our new understanding rather than relitigating old hurts. This was perhaps the most important provision and the most difficult to honor. Years of accumulated resentment don't disappear with a signed document, but we'd all made efforts to address issues directly rather than letting them fester beneath surface politeness. Dad signed first, his businessman signature bold and confident. I never thought I'd be signing a contract with my own daughters, he said, but I also never thought I'd need one. Mom signed next, her handwriting careful and deliberate. If this is what it takes to have honest relationships with both of you, then this is what we'll do. Emma signed third, adding a small smiley face next to her name. Here's to being equals instead of rivals. I signed last, completing a document that represented months of difficult conversations, hurt feelings, and gradual understanding. So what happens now? Emma asked, looking around the table at her family that had been reconstructed on more honest foundations. Now we test whether we can actually live by these principles, I said. Whether we can be a family based on mutual respect instead of assigned roles. Dad raised his water glass in a mock toast. To the end of the basement era and the beginning of whatever comes next. We clinked glasses, sealing an agreement that felt both momentous and fragile. The family constitution couldn't guarantee that we'd navigate future challenges perfectly, but it provided a framework for addressing conflicts before they became crises. Later, as we cleaned up the dinner dishes, Mom pulled me aside in my kitchen. I need to ask you something, she said quietly. Do you think you can forgive us? Not just accept our apologies, but actually forgive the years of treating you as less capable than you were. It was a question I'd been grappling with for months. The hurt was real, the damage was substantial, and the lost years of hiding my success couldn't be recovered. I think forgiveness is something I'll have to choose every day, I said honestly. Some days it'll be easier than others. But I want to forgive you because I want us to have a future together. She hugged me then, the kind of embrace that acknowledges pain while choosing hope. The family constitution was signed, but the real work of implementing it was just beginning. We established the rules for our new relationships. Now we had to learn how to live by them. 1 year later, I stood in my home office reviewing my property portfolio on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, sunlight streaming through windows that belonged to me. The dashboard showed 12 properties now, with a combined value approaching $2 million. The monthly rental income had grown to over $14,000, and my net worth had crossed the threshold that most financial advisors consider true wealth. But the numbers on the screen, impressive as they were, weren't what made me smile as I prepared for our monthly family brunch. The real victory was a text message from Emma that had arrived an hour earlier. Can't wait to tell everyone about the corporate event I booked yesterday, $15,000 for a product launch party. She was excited to share her success, confident that it would be celebrated rather than overshadowed. That shift in family dynamics was worth more than any property appreciation. The family brunches had become a monthly tradition, rotating between houses and providing a structured opportunity to practice our new relationship skills. Today was my turn to host, which meant my parents and Emma would see the latest updates to my townhouse and hear about my recent business developments. I'd closed on 2 new properties in the past quarter, a small apartment building and a commercial space that I was converting into mixed-use development. The projects represented a new level of sophistication in my investing strategy, moving beyond simple buy and hold rentals and a value-add development that required significant expertise and capital. The doorbell rang at exactly 11, and I opened it to find my parents carrying flowers and Emma holding a bottle of champagne. "What's the champagne for?" I asked, accepting hugs that felt natural and comfortable rather than obligatory. "Emma's big announcement," Mom said with genuine pride. "She's been dying to share her news." We settled around my dining table, the same furniture arrangement where we'd signed our family constitution 6 months earlier, and Emma practically bounced in her chair with excitement. "I got accepted into the exclusive vendor program for the convention center," she announced. "They only work with 12 event planners in the entire region, and I'm now one of them." The news was genuinely impressive. The convention center hosted some of the area's largest corporate events, weddings, and conferences. Being selected for their vendor program meant steady, high-paying work and significant credibility in the local event planning market. "That's incredible," I said, meaning it completely. "How did you make that happen?" Emma launched into the story of her presentation, the competition process, and the portfolio of events she'd used to demonstrate her capabilities. Her business had grown exponentially in the past year, not just in revenue, but in complexity and professional recognition. "I'm projected to gross over $200,000 this year," she said, her voice carrying the same pride I felt when discussing my property acquisitions. "Net profit should be around 60% of that." Dad beamed with the satisfaction of a parent whose child had exceeded expectations. "Both of our daughters running successful businesses," he said. I couldn't be prouder. The comment would have stung a year ago, when only one daughter's success was acknowledged. Now it felt like simple recognition of reality. After brunch, we toured my latest property acquisition, the mixed-use building I was converting just 6 blocks away. Emma examined the architectural plans with the eye of someone who understood commercial spaces, asking intelligent questions about foot traffic, parking, and the target market for the retail units. "This is really sophisticated," she said, studying the renovation timeline. "You're basically creating an entire small business ecosystem." "That's the idea," I confirmed. "Ground floor retail, second floor office space, residential units on the 3rd floor. It should generate about $4,000 in monthly rent when it's fully leased." Dad was taking notes on his phone, genuinely interested in understanding my business strategy. "What's your total time investment on a project like this?" "About 15 hours a week during the renovation phase," I said. "Once it's stabilized, maybe 3 hours a month for ongoing management." The questions reflected a level of respect for my expertise that would have been unimaginable during my basement years. They were treating me as a business owner and real estate professional, not as someone who needed guidance about basic financial planning. Later, as we walked back to my townhouse, Emma linked her arm through mine in a gesture that felt both familiar and new. "I have a confession," she said quietly. "For the first few months after your revelation, I resented your success. I felt like it diminished my own achievements." I waited for her to continue, understanding that this conversation was important for both of us. "But watching you this past year, seeing how you handle the business challenges and growth opportunities, it's inspired me to be better at my own work. Having a successful sister has actually made me more successful." The admission touched me deeply. We'd moved beyond competition to something that felt like collaboration, each of us pursuing excellence in our own areas while supporting the other's growth. As my family prepared to leave, Mom pulled out her phone and gathered us for a photo in front of my townhouse. It was a simple gesture, but it represented something profound, the first family photo in years where everyone was genuinely proud of everyone else. "I want to remember this," she said, positioning us in the afternoon sunlight. All of us successful, all of us happy, all of us finally seeing each other clearly. The photo captured 4 people who had learned to love each other based on reality rather than roles, expectations, or assumptions. My parents had learned to see me as the capable, successful woman I'd always been. Emma had learned to define success on her own terms rather than in comparison to others. And I'd learned that revealing the truth, difficult as it was, had been the only path to genuine relationships. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I opened my laptop and updated my investment spreadsheet with the latest property values and rental income projections. The numbers told the story of financial success beyond anything I originally imagined. But the real story was in my phone's photo gallery images of family gatherings where everyone belonged, business celebrations where everyone's achievements mattered, and conversations where everyone's expertise was valued. I'd started this journey trying to prove I was worthy of respect. I'd ended it with something better, a family that no longer needed anyone to fail in order for someone else to succeed. The basement was empty now, converted back to storage space. But the empire I built while living there continued to grow, no longer hidden in shadows but flourishing in the light of honest relationships and mutual recognition. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving you were right all along. Sometimes it's creating space for everyone to be right about their own worth, their own dreams, and their own definitions of success. The property portfolio would continue growing, but the family foundation we'd rebuilt on honesty and respect was the investment that would pay dividends for generations to come.